when my kids were little, I've got 22-year-old twins right now. Twins just turned 22, girls. But when they were small, when they were tiny, one of my absolute favorite times of the day would be when Sesame Street would come on. Anybody got little kids? Remember when Sesame Street would come on? Because when Sesame Street would come on, for a precious 30 minutes, my children would be still. And they wouldn't destroy anything in the house for just these precious 30 minutes. But for me personally, my favorite part of a Sesame Street sort of show every single day was that they had a letter of the day. Remember they would have a letter of the day they would go through? Well, we're actually going to have a letter of the day. That's sort of the theme that unites everything I'm going to talk about. We're going to have a letter of the day, and the letter of the day is going to be E. Letter E. We're going to talk today about Europe. Starts with an E, not with a U. When we talk about the U.S. economy, we're going to talk about two E's. We're going to talk about exports. Starts with an E, not with an X. We're going to talk about employment. There's also an E. And then finally, I'm going to wrap up my remarks with just a little bit of commentary, because I can't help myself, on the election. Talk a little bit about the election, too. So let's get started with what's going on in Europe. Because for those of you who have been in the industry for quite some time, you'll realize that we're going through the third financial crisis in 15 years. This is the third financial crisis of my career. You know, I had a different color hair when this all started. I'm getting kind of tired of this. I don't know about you guys. But in order to understand the crisis that's unfolding very slowly, this financial crisis is unfolding a little bit slower than the Asian financial crisis of '97 and the sort of typical financial crisis that we all think of now, 2008, the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009. This third, what I'll call the European financial crisis, it's unfolding a little bit more slowly than the other ones that we experienced in the late 90s and just 3-4 years ago. In order to understand it, you need some historical perspective on it. Now, in order to get some historical perspective on it, I think you have to go way back. You have to go way back to the late 1980s. In fact, you have to go back to 1989 to truly understand the events that are unfolding in Europe today. So let's go all the way back to 1989 and think about the world as it was in 1989. I was a young college student studying at Southern Methodist University, and I was studying business and economics. I was a student back in 1989. In 1989, what was considered to be the world's strongest economy? Does anybody remember? It wasn't the United States. That's right. It was Japan. When I went to business school back in the late 1980s, everybody told me, young lady, if you're going to be a businesswoman in the next century, you are going to need to learn to speak Japanese. Do you remember that? Can you imagine how bad my hillbilly Japanese would have been? I'm so glad I did not take that advice, because in 1989, the Tokyo stock market peaked. To this very day, it is still 75% of its peak value. To this very day, it's never recovered. Remember, they were selling real estate by the inch in Tokyo proper, in downtown Tokyo, in 1989. We were all going to work for Sony. Remember that? And then we're going to take over. That was 1989. And the reason I'm sort of sharing that with you, so if you're all worried about China taking over, remember Japan, okay? Do not encourage your children to go learn Mandarin or any of the other many languages that they speak in China, okay? Wasting their time, because I can assure you they can buy the little Rosetta Stone English thing and learn it just as quickly. So don't waste your time. Japan in 1989, world's strongest economy. What about the United States? Well, the United States was mired in the Cold War still in 1989. We were still sort of going through the Cold War, experiencing that. We had emerged from the dreadful economic decade that was the 1970s, the high inflation, the high interest rates, the high unemployment rates. We had 9 years of pretty decent stock market growth, but the United States was kind of somewhere in the middle, because we were still fighting with Russia, remember? Russia, who in 1989 was withdrawing from Afghanistan after 10 long years of trying to dominate that country. Didn't work for them, did it? It's pretty funny how history sort of repeats itself, doesn't it? Whenever I hear U.S. politicians say, we're going to leave Afghanistan just as soon as we can sort of teach them how to fight. And I'm thinking to myself, I think they know how to fight. I'm just watching them, and I think maybe we might learn how to fight from them, but they look to me like they really know what they're doing. So we're good there. What about Europe? In 1989, Europe was mired in what we called Eurosclerosis. Anybody who was a business school student at that point who remembers Eurosclerosis? Eurosclerosis characterized what we knew then as Western Europe, because Eastern Europe in 1989 was still behind the Iron Curtain. They were still behind the Iron Curtain in 1989. So in 1989, Europe's economies were characterized by a bloated public sector, high taxes, heavy regulation, inflexible labor markets. And we sort of wrapped that all together and called it Eurosclerosis. Sounds awful, doesn't it? Like, who would want that? But in 1989, in the fall of 1989, something quite remarkable happened. In the fall of 1989, I was actually studying abroad. I was a college student, and I was studying abroad in Denmark in 1989. I was studying what then was known as East-West business relations, something that very rapidly disappeared in the 1990s, but there was something called East-West business relations. I was a study abroad student. For those of you who have college students, let me tell you something. It is no longer study abroad, it is drinking abroad, okay? They are going there for a 4-month vacation to drink and pick up a couple of classes that they're going to get a pass-fail grade in. All right, does everybody understand this, that you're paying for your kids to go on vacation? But back when I went, we actually did a little bit of studying, and we took a study tour to what was then East Berlin. I drove through Checkpoint Charlie. They looked underneath our buses to see if anybody was hiding up underneath there, took our passports, came onto the bus, the whole thing. 3 weeks after I went through Checkpoint Charlie, something remarkable happened. The Berlin Wall fell like that. Do you guys remember 1989 when the Berlin Wall just came down? Like, if you weren't paying attention, you missed it. It just happened that quickly. And the history, the economic and the political history of the Western world changed in front of our eyes in a short couple of months. Very, very quickly. Now, the reason that's important for our story today is this. When the Berlin Wall fell and Germany was reunified, 2 things occurred. Number 1, the reunification of East Germany and West Germany created, right in the center of Europe, a massive export-oriented powerhouse economy right in the middle of Europe. So if you think about what's going on today and why Germany is dominating the economic discussions that's going on, it's because that experience, whether you took old East Germany and West Germany and put them together, when you did that, you created a huge industrial, export-oriented powerhouse economy right in the middle of Europe. The second thing that the reunification of Germany accomplished was it lit a fire underneath the Euro project. Now see, the idea of a single currency for Europe, it'd been around since the 1950s. It wasn't a new idea in the 90s. It had been around since the 1950s when policymakers in Western Europe said one way that we could politically unify and hopefully prevent things like World War I and World War II from happening again is we could undertake massive political unification. That's what they were going after. And the way that we would unify politically is we would adopt a common currency. The common currency, by the way, would be one step on the road to political unification. It'd be one step on the road. But the reunification of Germany in the late 80s, early 90s, lit a fire under the single currency project. Now, the Maastricht Treaty was fully enforced by 1992. Took 8 years to create the European Central Bank and the common currency, okay? It was a long-term project. So this idea that we're going to solve Europe's problems in a year is ridiculous. It took 8 years to create the common currency. But what's most sort of important for our story today, if you sort of think about it, this sort of creation of the common currency, what we need to understand today is this. Back in the 90s, there were many economists, one in particular, Mundell, who won a Nobel Prize, second one, Martin Feldstein, who came out and said, the euro will never work. It's not going to work, and here's why. Europe is not an optimal currency area. Europe is not an optimal currency area. Now, when the economists came out and said this, guess what? They didn't get invited back to next year's conference. It was absolutely remarkable. If you were an economist who came out in Europe and said, you know, this is never going to work, they would not put you on the program next year. But Europe's not an optimal currency area, and here's why. There are 4 important conditions for an optimal currency area. Number 1, capital and labor, money and people, have to be able to move freely within an optimal currency area. So if you think about the United States, we have people here probably from just about all 50 states, I would guess. And if you want to visit, say, Arkansas, where my family is from, do I need a passport? My husband says I probably should get a passport to visit a place like Arkansas, that we really should have our own sort of passport. But I don't need a passport, do I? Just go, right? No border checks or anything like that. Likewise, I can bank all over the United States. I can go to an ATM, and even though my account was opened in Virginia, I can get money out of an ATM here in South Carolina, right? So money and people move freely within an optimal currency area. And you can legislate that, and Europe legislated that and said, we're going to have freedom of movement and freedom of people. That's not hard. Second thing, though, that you need your business cycle in an optimal currency area. You need your business cycle to always move in the same way. So what that means is, like, think about the United States. If there is a recession taking place in, say, New York, chances are there's going to be a recession going on in Mississippi as well, because there's always a recession going on in Mississippi. But in the United States, in general, the economy looks very similar across the entire United States. If one area is booming, chances are another is going to be booming too. If one area is in recession, chances are another is going to be in recession. Now, that's not true in Europe. Think about just how different the economies of the Scandinavian countries look from Greece, Italy, Portugal. They look very different. Now, this problem is not insurmountable if you have the ability to do the third condition I want to discuss, and that is in the ability to make physical transfers from rich areas to poor areas. Because if you think about it, in the United States, huge physical transfers from states like New York, Illinois, New Jersey, and Connecticut to the tune of between 5 and 10% of their federal tax dollars get sent out of the states every single year to places where people talk like I do. Arkansas, Mississippi, West Virginia. Those states all are net beneficiaries of federal tax dollars every year. And this is the sticking point for Europe. They have no formal mechanism to collect taxes at a federal level and redistribute money away from Germany and the richer countries to the poorer states of Greece, Spain, and Italy. They don't have a formal mechanism. They don't have a way to do it. Everything's kind of hodgepodge, and they've been sort of putting Band-Aids on it. Now, could they come up with one? Sure, they could. How long do you think it'll take, though? Because every time I see them sort of going to their conferences and having these summit meetings, it looks to me like they're just drinking wine, men kissing men, hugging, walking out and saying, we plan to come up with the plan. That's pretty much all they've said. Oh, we plan to come up with the plan. But you see, I don't actually believe they'll ever be able to come up with a plan that will keep the Eurozone together in the form that it is today for the following reason. They do not satisfy the fourth condition, the most important condition, the one that you cannot legislate, the one you can't make rules around. They do not satisfy the fourth condition, and that is, in order to be an optimal currency area, you must share a common destiny and a common identity. You must. So if you think about in the United States, I took a trip to Rome 2 weeks ago. It was my husband's 50th birthday. So I took him to Rome. We went to the Vatican. And when people asked me where I was from, if they couldn't figure out where I was from, what do you think I would tell them? I didn't say I was from Arkansas, because they wouldn't know where that is. I said, I'm from the United States, right? Because that's what I identify with. I don't identify with being an Arkansan. I identify with being an American. Somebody asks me where I am, I say I'm an American. If someone from Europe comes to the United States and you say, where are you from? What do they tell you? Do they say, I'm a European? No. They say, I'm from Greece. They say, I'm from Germany. If they're from France, they don't talk to you. But if they did, they would say I was French. That's what they do. You see, they do not have a sense of a common destiny. They do nationally, but they certainly don't have one across Europe. And because of that, there is no way that they are going to get around politically the problem of the very large transfers of dollars that it would take to keep their union together.